Discussion, where today we're looking at cargo operations, the continuity of air cargo operations during the COVID-19 pandemic, and the vaccine disruption challenge that we may be faced with. So just as a brief introduction to this technical panel, I wanted to explore a few things and a few discussions first. So throughout the duration of COVID, what we saw was the need to have flexibility, agility, and efficiency. These are the key drivers for success for both cargo and commercial aviation industry. And this is what allowed us to work through the disruption caused by the pandemic. And what we've seen, both commercial and cargo operators, that all stakeholders really have been playing a part in ensuring the continuity of service as traffic around the world was halted. At the start of the pandemic, we saw the requirement for repatriation flights, humanitarian aid, and of course, what we'll brief on today is the critical cargo operations. So all the airlines and providers needed to be in a position to operate. Since the COVID-19 crisis began, air cargo has been a vital partner in delivering medicines and medical equipment, PPEs, in quantities that we've probably not seen before. And we've been required to keep the global supply chains functioning for the most time-sensitive of materials that are being carried. This has been undertaken through both dedicated cargo freighter operations, and also what we've seen is the utilization of cargo capacity in passenger aircraft. So if I just bring to you the attention that the impact of the cancellation of 4 million passenger flights across the globe, that reduced international belly cargo capacity significantly. So we've seen over 100 carriers performed required cargo operations by transforming their passenger aircraft into cargo-only operations. IATA itself, we work with ICAO and other regulatory bodies to ensure air cargo supply chains remain open. And we advocate for governments to facilitate all cooperation so we can start planning for the recovery across this global network. And what we probably see ourselves in at the moment is what I could call a steady state operations. So the next challenge that we shall be faced with is the delivery of the vaccine and the potential operational capacity constraints for delivering it global once the vaccines become available. And it's estimated that we need approximately 8,000 747s or equivalent aircraft to distribute the vaccine globally. So today's session will look at how we create operational contingency plans to combat the challenges that lie ahead, and also what post-COVID-19 procedures should be considered to be permanently to enhance efficiency. So when we step out of this pandemic, we're in a better position than where we were before. Anyway, moving on to today's panel discussion, I'm really delighted to be moderating today's panel and joined by experts. So we have the Regional Director, North America, Central America and the Caribbean for ICAO, Mr. Melvin Cintron. We have Mr. Emmanuel Omondi Sidigu, the Manager of Network Operations Control for Middle East and Africa area for cargo operator DHL. And finally, we have Mrs. Flora Wakolo, who is the Chief Air Traffic Control Officer for Operations for the Kenyan Civil Aviation Authority. The bios for all our panelists are available online. However, as a brief introduction to the panel, I'll introduce Mr. Cintron. He's responsible for providing the executive leadership to achieve ICAO's vision and mission in support of 41 countries, which are 22 ICAO contracting states and 19 territories. He also has over 14 years of combined military, industry and government aviation experience, some of which was undertaken here in the mid-region. Mr. Emmanuel brings to the panel his operational expertise. He's worked for 12 years in flight operations, in dispatch, scheduling, aircraft management and network control operations. He's been working predominantly with mid-region carriers and is currently working, as I've mentioned before, for DHL based in Bahrain. And finally, over to Mrs. Flora Wakolo, the Chief Air Traffic Controller in charge of operations for the Kenyan airspace. She's based at their headquarters and she oversees the air traffic operations for 9 air traffic services. She coordinates with these centres to ensure that the Kenyan Civil Aviation Authority mandate of planning, developing, managing and operating a safe, economically sustainable and efficient civil aviation system in Kenya is achieved. So I would like to say thank you and welcome to all panelists today. Anyway, without further ado, I think we should jump straight in and start the discussion. So I'd like to address my first question, if I may, to Flora. So if we can take a look into Africa, to the AFI region, what have AFI, and in particular Kenya, undertaken in terms of facilitating cargo flights at the onset of this pandemic? Thank you, Flora.
Thank you, Sharron. As you know, Africa is a developing continent, and so to speak, Kenya is one of the developing nations. So when the pandemic started in China, way back in February, we were at least privileged to have a meeting, that is a training session that was convened by ICAO, World Health Organization, and CDC Africa. Ideally, they had already identified Africa as a vulnerable continent because of the weak health systems that we have. But we were able to build on the experiences that we had with Ebola since 2014. And as you are aware, Ebola is still with us, some pockets of Ebola within Africa, and we are managing. So we built on that to be able to manage COVID-19. So during the training, that was in February, at that time, I think only 24 countries had positive cases. And then that was between 16th and the training was on 14th to 16th February. So as we were going through the training, unfortunately, we got the bad news that Africa had recorded the first case, and that was in Egypt. And therefore, we had to engage our overdrive gear. And from that time on, what happened is we were able to train the surveillance personnel at points of entry so that they were building on what exists at the moment under the ICAO CAPSCA program. And also CDC was able to facilitate, to help us build capacity in terms of laboratories, because Africa had only two, one in Dakar and South Africa. But courtesy of CDC Africa, the number of laboratories in February had increased to 15, so that we would have quick response in terms of, getting results after testing the cases. And that was found to be one of the fundamental issues that were required to manage COVID-19. And then thereafter, we were able to also conduct training amongst the CAPSCA members who are going down to, that was a trainer program. So they were going back to their countries and train the other personnel just in case COVID, entered the countries. And therefore you find that that early preparement in terms of capacity building, in terms of training, helped Africa and more so Kenya to be able to handle the pandemic effectively, because as you're aware, the whole world was worried about Africa. But as you have seen, the numbers in Africa are not as massive as they were expected to be. And it's because of this kind of training that took place early enough that we were able to combat, the COVID-19. In as far as air travel is concerned, maybe what Africa may be grappling with is the community, infections. And what we have realized is most of the people are asymptomatic. And so every government is doing whatever they can be able to do to combat. However, getting back to aviation, you find that during that time, most of the airspaces were closed. But there was need for these cargo flights to be undertaken. And therefore, we were able as a country through our national carrier, the Kenya Airways, we adopted the public health corridor concept that was developed. It was a multi-sectoral development of the public health corridor concept. And we were able to operationalize this because it took care of operational aspects, maintenance aspects, and facilitation aspects. Because remember, aircraft had been on ground for some time. And therefore, for aircraft to get back on in flight, they required, the C of A validity. They required facilitation, have clean crew, and certified, and have pre-COVID checks, tests conducted, and of course carry, the COVID-19 kits. And then on the air traffic control side, remember, traffic had gone down, and therefore, when traffic goes down, naturally there's what we call skill degradation, and therefore we had to now get our air traffic controllers back in the simulators, and then be able to pump some traffic so that they could be able to build back their confidence and make sure that their license validity was in order in the way that ICAO has prescribed, including medical fitness. And we thank God that as a country, we were blessed, still blessed as we speak, because we have not recorded any case in the control rooms. So we never reached a point where we had to close the control rooms. And therefore the air traffic controllers were there, ready to facilitate. The pilots for Kenya Airways, they managed to undertake the international flights to Europe. These were majorly repatriation and cargo, as you have indicated in the opening remarks. And they did flights to London, to Asia, including, I think, Guangzhou in China, in the middle of the pandemic. And as soon as they got the people back, of course, the mitigations that had been put in place during training were activated, and that helped quite a lot in managing both cargo flights, including that sterile cockpit element. And you'd find pilots or crew, for that matter, when they arrived, we are lucky to have hotels at the airport, and therefore they would be quarantined there or isolated for, initially, remember there was that mandatory 14 days before they would go and see or meet their families. And that worked for us quite well. And the continuous screening also did us very, very good in terms of management of cargo. Also regionally, Kenya Airways was able to conduct flights within East Africa, because it's a major carrier, and also in Southern Africa and parts of West Africa. And there were limitations, although, because unlike now, when the pandemic was at its at a high rate, that's about May, June, every country had its own restrictions. Some were quite punitive, but as time went by, you realize that when people understood what COVID-19 is all about, then a few of those restrictions started being relaxed. And going forward, we are hoping that we're going to have a standardized way of managing this traffic and handling the goods, especially when we get into the vaccine era where we expect so much cargo to be transported across the globe. Because from where I sit, I'm informed that ICAO was able to approve some of the requirements, and therefore that will lead to standardization. And as you know, once some things are standardized, then you end up with a seamless kind of operation. And I hope that will come to pass. And then the other thing that we did as a country, we just adopted the best practices, that is providing crew briefs and debriefs. The crew had to have layered PPEs, and then training for and communication and protocols to be observed at all points of entry. And so at times, some of the crew had to sleep in the aircraft if they didn't want to go to the hotel for their own safety. And we facilitated that. And then risk assessment was conducted by the authorities and the airport management, and then intersectoral collaboration. Actually, it took a multi-sectorial collaboration to be able to come up with all these procedures and manage to support the cargo flights during that time. And of course, the government was very key by coming up with guidelines, not just for aviation, but the entire, the other sectors, because they are interlinked with the aviation sector, and that helped quite a lot. And of course, continuous monitoring, evaluation, and, coming up with mitigation where we feel that we have some gaps. And as usual, the health screening, that is still mandatory, and I see that going forward. And with the vaccine knocking, we want to believe that it will be part of the normal vaccines that people have to have before they travel, like yellow fever and the rest. And yeah, basically that's what Kenya was able to do. And we learned quite some, because it gave us an opportunity to reflect on how our systems have been previously. We learned quite a lot from that. And we learned from it showed that whatever lessons we learned from Ebola as a region came to assist us quite a lot. And of course, the other thing that we have learned is that you always have to plan for the unexpected. Because honestly, we've had these pandemics before, but never did we know that it would hit the whole world the way it has done this time. So that's another learning point, and something that will enable the entire world, and Africa for that matter, and even Kenya, my country, to be able to plan for the unexpected.
Thank you, Flora. And you've mentioned so many points there, but I think one of the things that I think it brings to all of us is this ability that we had to react immediately, to deliver things for the region so quickly, especially when we had to consider all the mitigations or the safety risk assessments, that we were able as an industry to do this, to facilitate moving cargo, essential cargo, moving people around, repatriating people. And standards, yes, because it makes it facilitates it for the industry. And what you've said is that you've now got the lessons learned, and I saw the smile on your face, because I think it realizes what can be achieved in so little time when we have something that we've never experienced before. But one of the things, if I may, on the airspace side, bring you back to also, is one of the things that we were hit with was to ensure the availability of airspace and aerodromes. And this was not just to facilitate overflights or to facilitate arrivals and departures. One of the critical things that we learned that we had to have the emergency aerodromes available for the en route. And I think that's something that we also learned in the air traffic management side, that the civil aviation authorities also needed to look at, reacting to the immediate requirements and also maintaining the airspace. From your perspective on the airspace specifically, did yourself and the CAA put in any measures to facilitate the actual operations to make sure that the airspace and the aerodromes were available?
Yes, we did. Actually, for us as airspace managers, we never closed the airspace. We were ready to facilitate whichever flights that were available for flying. And our own, of course, we had to facilitate our own national carrier because they had to change, you know, they're more of passenger. And now they had changed their, like you had indicated, you know, they changed the passenger, you know, fleet into cargo, and they had to move around. And apart from Kenya Airways, Kenyan airspace never closed at any one time. Our air traffic facilities never closed at any one time. The only thing that happened is because of the curfew that was imposed in the country, we just scaled down as a way of backup, just in case, you know, you have some of the staff, you know, by bad luck, maybe contracting COVID, so that you don't have to close down the facilities. So we scaled down because the traffic levels had gone down. So those who are on duty worked a bit longer hours to enable those who are off duty, so that in event we have a calamity in the control room, we would have air traffic controllers to take over and not close the airspace. But like I said earlier, we thank God so far, none of our controllers has contracted COVID, because we also put measures within the control room. You know, the sanitization and, you know, the cleaning, all that. And a lot of awareness was created to the air traffic controllers, because they carry weight, because if they are not there to provide service, then how will the flights, you know, operate? Much as we had the doctors, you know, and nurses as frontline, you know, key personnel, in the background, we had people like the air traffic controllers and others, you know, the ones who manage, you know, the airport security and all that, you know, backing up the whole process.
Okay, thank you, Flora. So we've just looked briefly there at the detail within a region and within one country, Kenya. I have a couple of questions that I'm going to open the same question to all the panelists. And I'll start, if I may, with Melvin before moving on to Emmanuel and then Flora. So Melvin, from ICAO's perspective, looking at what you do in your region, managing the Americas and the Caribbean, what do you think of the new operational contingency plans that we brought in because of this pandemic, but are here to stay, that are here to make the operational environment better? Thank you, Melvin.
Thank you. And if I may, congratulations to Flora in Kenya and the actions taken. Very well done. Of course, Africa holds a special place in my heart since I was there for Safe Skies for Africa project for many years. But anyway, as far as contingency plans, you know that the annexes of ICAO, and if I may, not to insult anybody's intelligence, but just so you have a perspective of what ICAO does and is. ICAO is the global body of 193 member states that sets the global standards and recommended practices that all countries must follow in order to ensure safe, secure, efficient air transport. In a nutshell, that's what we do, and that's why you always hear, well, ICAO standards, is because that's what we all have to follow. And our Annex 11 actually talks about air traffic services and contingency plans and things like this. So when you talk about what's here to stay for us to change a standard, that's done in collaboration with the countries, with the state, with the industry, and with our experts. So there has been a lot that has been improved, a lot of lessons learned. I think Flora mentioned quite a few of them. A lot of lessons learned. Whether they're here to stay, I think will be more of best practices, as has been mentioned. That's one of the things. I think the things that are coming out of here are going to be best practices and also standardization, which is another item that was talked about. Standardizing the way that we approach how we meet the challenges of providing that supply chain that cargo provides and not being interrupted and being able to deliver what needs to be delivered, especially now when we start looking at the vaccines. You know, what are we doing to make sure that the supply chain has everything it needs to ensure that those vaccines can be delivered everywhere? So one of the things that I think will come out of this is that we will have some best practices that will be identified and that may become recommendations later on when we finally get together and start looking at this. Right now, we're concentrating on the restart of aviation. We're concentrating on developing, and we have developed guidances and recommendations for all the countries under the CART, which is the Council Aviation Recovery Task Force that was put together, and that is made up of the ICAO Council, many of the member states, many of the industry partners, and we've come up with recommendations and guidance in all aspects. So I think for now, we're looking at what are those best practices? What are the things that the states are gathering the data at the same time that we're providing the guidance and that we're urging all the states to be as standardized in the application of our recommendations as possible, because that's what's going to ensure the global confidence that is needed right now, not only for cargo, but definitely also for passenger services. We need to make sure that the global confidence in air travel and in cargo and all these things is built again. So we've taken a very strong approach in that, and we look at what's being done, what the contingencies that are being implemented in each one of the states, both here in my region, in Africa region, Asia, everywhere. And we think there's going to be quite a few items that are here to stay, but we would not make them mandatory right now or make them actual standards at this point. But we definitely are promoting, and we're definitely identifying the things that are critical to ensure that continuity of connectivity, that continuity of safe operations. And as Flora indicated, most air service providers didn't shut down. They didn't shut down. I mean, borders shut down, but most air service providers did not. And you know, cargo operations have been a lifeline to many states, and it's actually something that has shined as part of this. And I think that's something else that's here to stay. You know, value and the importance and the recognition of the role that air cargo plays in our world. That recognition is definitely here to stay, as are many of the items that are being put in place. For example, we're working with trying to identify that states don't overburden the system with additional rules that are not really geared towards the effective and efficient transport of cargo or even the passengers. So when we talked about standardization before, that's one of the things I think we're learning, is that we need to ensure standardized systems within the global mechanism of air cargo and of passenger travel. So the fact that we've provided recommendations, yet each state is still a sovereign state, and how they implement those recommendations can vary quite a bit from state to state. And that becomes a problem, especially when you're traveling, you're flying from one airspace into another airspace, and you land and the conditions are so vastly different on what is expected of the crew, which can ground an aircraft, can ground a crew, can quarantine somebody. So that's where we try to ensure that our states know and understand. And as Flora said, that's why ICAO is providing training, is providing outreach, is providing the leadership and the guidance to ensure that these best practices are being identified, that they're being implemented, and that we're tracking everything that's going on within the world regarding these issues.
Thank you. And you did touch on something, and I think, you know, it really did, this pandemic, highlight to the world, not just to the aviation industry, but to the world, the importance of cargo operations, the importance of moving valuable items all over the globe. And I think that's one of the things that we have seen. So in addition to the passengers, to the repatriation, to moving people about, to be with their families, for work, for whatever reasons, we've really seen the cargo industry really show what a critical role that they have for moving all types of freight. To that, if I may, I'm going to move on to Emmanuel, because you're there at the operational edge for DHL based in Bahrain. So you have been sat there needing to put your aircraft in places that you've never potentially ordinarily operated, many challenges and changes. So what do you see also that some of the contingency measures that have been put in place to facilitate cargo operations that you think are here to stay or potentially here to stay? And some of also not just the challenges that you've had, but some of the outcomes, the successful outcomes that you've seen while trying to run the operation from the mid-region. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharron. Thank you, Flora and Melvin, for your contribution. I will start with this here. Cargo is here to stay. Now, to jump into the contingency and operational aspect, I'll jump in from the capacity perspective. Now, if you look at how when the pandemic hit and most of the passengers airlines, pretty much they had to, flights were reduced because some of the airports were actually not being operational until the criteria is met. So actually, from a cargo perspective, we had to do what we call the schedule adjustment. Now, schedule adjustment comes, you don't fly on the very normal schedule that you have because some of the airports are non-operational. And we have to keep into consideration that most of the ground operating staff some of them, they had to go through curfew. So coming to the airport and out of the airport for minimal in terms of time perspective. Now here we had to adjust schedules based on the connectivity and the capacity that is required. Now, from that perspective, we deviated from the normal operation of how we do our schedules to an operational perspective that will meet the demand in terms of moving materials from point A to point B, and also in terms of having the correct quorum of staff at the airport to make sure we have an on-time departure. Now, really, this called for a slot adjustment. As you're aware, most of the slots in terms of the aircraft cargo operations, they may be on the summer slot booking and winter slot booking. So that adjustment had to be done. And on a second perspective, it is requiring to work with small players. Small players, what I mean, the big players, the DHL, FedEx, and the USPS, but the small players, these are small charter companies or charter aircraft that we had to work with. For example, I'll just throw a scenario right here. In terms of if we want to operate, we're moving material from the Asia Pacific. That's supposed to go all the way to Johannesburg. This is just a scenario I'm bringing in. So we don't have the 777s that are flying all the way to Johannesburg based on the pandemic and the restrictions that are put in place. So what we had to do, and Flora may be aware, we have to operate to Kenya. And then from Kenya, we fly on the Kenya on the charter base on the 737 to Johannesburg. So it's a win-win situation for both. Our schedule may not match to land into Johannesburg at a particular time, but with the collaboration of other players, we managed to move the material based on the connectivity that we had. And on the other stuff is adjusting the network on a bigger perspective. How we adjust the network, we have to keep into consideration the capacity of the materials that we have. Keep in mind, at that time when the pandemic hit, most of the materials were not being moved to the hub for the transportation because everything was being on hold. So we had the surging volumes that I had. Now capacity was also being questioned at that particular time in terms of can we move all these materials? And from a cargo perspective, in terms of business, sales, and marketing, they are divided, not to sound so technical, but the materials are divided based on priorities, right? So now you have those that are time definite materials where they need to reach the destination on time. Most of the cargo airlines suffer that, whereby now we are going as long as we read the materials on time, rather than that specific, operation procedure of a time requirement. So capacity had to be adjusted on that. And on the other thing that I see that is here to stay is the COVID test at the airport. What we've done with most of our crew is that prior to them arriving to Bahrain or going to different destinations, but this is what we mostly do with the Americas and the European flights that's coming into Bahrain. We agreed with the operator whereby they have the information, the crew passport and everything being sent to the authorities here in Bahrain, and then they do, once they arrive, everything is arranged in terms of airport transportation, and they go to the COVID test at the airport. So based on that, we really actually departing on time rather than the last minute hiccups whereby they're being stopped at the airport, then they have to do this, but it's already pre-arranged. So with that type of mitigating way of handling an operation, we've already saved a lot of time in terms of having an on-time departure, and it's a practice where it's part of the contingency that we've been working on. And on the other side, if you look at the cost perspective, right? From my perspective, I see that cost is going to rise in terms of the demand is high in terms of where the cargo needs to go and all the particular time. But for us to facilitate that, other players have to come into place. Now, other players, that's what I'm saying, is the charter part that have to come into place. Players that we used to work with together. For example, I gave it into Africa. Africa being a very wide region, but some of the airports cannot hold a bigger aircraft. For example, we need the 747s for the vaccine at a global perspective, right? So we have to have a central hub that can take these big wide body aircraft to facilitate all these cargoes. And then, quote unquote, we have what we call the feeder flights that are coming from the small regions that these bigger aircraft cannot fly to, right? So these feeder flights come and take the materials, and then we meet the demand. But again, I go back to my first point whereby I said, all these feeder flights are coming from this region that is still curfew going on in terms of time. Schedule adjustment has to be done so that we can meet the demand, of the contingency in terms of materials reaching in the correct place at the correct time. And another thing that it has to stay is the on-ground help, on-ground employees help in terms of the COVID test on a daily basis, right? Before they go to the airside, they go through all these tests. Why? Because their health is very important. And in terms of if one person say tests COVID, then it's a whole group that has to go through isolation. So that is something that we really avoid, and we make sure everyone is healthy before coming to work. Yeah.
Thank you. So one of the things that you've said there, which I just picked up on right at the end, was looking at the health of the people, and Flora also brought it up, that when we come out of this, that we also, we talk about the airspace, we talk about the aircraft, we talk about the guidelines and the provisions, but we actually have to look after the people. So the contingency measures that you've put in place to look after the health of the people, that you see this is something that we'll continue to do for whatever the future may bring, to make sure that we already have in place the measures to protect our people, but allow our people to serve the industry timely and efficiently as needed.
Absolutely right.
And you also mentioned the fact that you'd started to look at different models that where aerodromes are not available to place in a Code F aircraft, or let's say 777, 747 type aircraft, that you've looked at other means and ways to make the cargo to destination by having partnerships and agreements with other connections and other operators. And you see that this, although it was contingency, this is something that you see that will continue for the future?
Yeah, it's something that's going to continue for the future until we come out of the pandemic, to be honest, at this time. Because if you look at how the airlines are operating back, it's more of a sequential way. It's more of a sequential. So we're coming back in full force, but at the same time, there's a lockdown coming in again. So just to play on the safe side, it's something that we're going to work on it until we come out of the pandemic.
So you have to have the agility, the flexibility to be able to meet. And I suppose this is a lesson that's been learnt. So Flora, may I ask, you did touch on it, that within your area of responsibility, the contingency measures that you brought in to protect your staff, to ensure continuation of service, are these specific items that you're going to continue with for the future, for whatever may come?
Yes. One, because COVID-19 being a virus is going to be with us and it will stay with us. And therefore, just like other, pandemics, once we are done with the global effect, remember, it will just be subdued. But we will need to continue with the measures that we are putting in place because being a virus, we are not sure whether it will completely be wiped out. And by the time it's being wiped out, it means the whole globe will have to be vaccinated. But that's going to take a while. But thank God that we have this, the collaborative arrangement for prevention and management of public health events in civil aviation, commonly known as CAPSCA. That was put in place way back in 2009 and has greatly facilitated the region, particularly, Africa, in effectively managing public health emergencies of international nature. So these contingencies will continue being put in place, and we'll just be re-emphasizing to our air traffic controllers and other key players on the need to make sure that they don't forget about, the processes that have been outlined, because like I've said, the virus is still there with us, and cargo has been there from the inception of aviation and will continue being there. And like Omondi said, the big carriers will bring cargo to maybe the international airports, and then you'll have the small carriers within a country, now delivering the same cargo to other smaller airports, including the vaccine. So in terms of traffic, I'm glad that traffic is going to stay, because at one point air traffic controllers were like, wow, the airspace is closing. Does it mean that our jobs are going, or whatever it is? Now, this brings hope that the jobs will be also there to stay. The air traffic controllers' jobs will also be there to stay. And therefore, the global plans that we have in place, that we have been pursuing, will now come, to be, very effective. The seamless operations and stuff like that, because you had what Omondi said, like when you bring in cargo with a bigger carrier, then you have to now disseminate the same cargo within a given state using small carriers. And then now, the other thing that is going to be there is maybe what might just change a bit is airlines and the small carriers may have to rethink on what best suits them. Those who have been doing maybe the tourism and all that has really scaled down may now think in terms of going cargo.
Absolutely, thank you. Now on to my final question, if I may. So we talk about agility and efficiency, and I've seen from my position, looking at some of the ways that we've trialed new procedures for free route airspace, direct route operations, creating efficiencies in the airspace. And with a downturn in traffic, you know, we can build confidence. So we can see some things that we've trialed during the pandemic that we can see potentially where demand and capacity are at a certain level, that we can maintain these efficiencies to support operations. But outside of that, what other efficiencies have we seen during the crisis, and how can we maintain our operational efficiency for the duration of this pandemic? If I may, I'm going to go back to Melvin to answer this question before opening it to Emmanuel and then to Flora. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, there's quite a few efficiencies that have been gained. And I'd like to go back to something about what are things that are here to stay. And I didn't mention them because they were already here. But I think the importance and the relevance of those things like risk management, you know, the awareness of risk management, that's here to stay. The industry engagement with authorities at a level that wasn't done before, because now they need to interact very much with the authorities. That's also, I think, has expanded quite a bit, and that'll probably stay. Contingency planning. So, you know, in my region, obviously, I have many islands in the Caribbean. And on top of the COVID-19, we also have the hurricane seasons that come every year. So while we're used to contingency planning, and actually I even heard from some of my authorities say, well, we're used to adversity and planning for these things, but this COVID has been a whole different issue and a whole different matter altogether. So I think the contingency planning is the way it's looked at now. Well, it's also very different. We talked about, Flora talked about CASCAP. Definitely the importance of CASCAP in the value that it brings to bringing health authorities and mitigations and all these various authorities together for the benefit of coming up with solutions. It's also something that won't go away. So what are the efficiencies? The efficiencies are, I think, based in the communication that's being done. We haven't reached the level of efficiencies that we need because of the lack of standardization that still exists in the implementation of things that are recommended to be implemented. So that's something that I think we'll continue to struggle with, but that we've learned many lessons from as far as things that we will be doing in the future. Setting up the guidance documents that are found within the CART. I think those things have developed into not standards because they're not there yet, but they've developed into best practices that will be followed by states and are being followed by states. And those levels of efficiencies that have come out of those working groups that were started because of the council's efforts and leadership are going to identify quite a few of them. And I believe it's going to be for the betterment. So, you know, people say there's always a silver lining somewhere. One of the things that we say is, look, we cannot afford to lose the opportunity that COVID-19 has given us in learning and implementing these things that will lead to the best efficiency, to the best air transport system in the world, in each one of the states. So globally, I think there's a lot of efficiencies that have been gained, and we'll be actually identifying them, and we are identifying them through the different working groups that are putting out the information. And if you go to any of our websites of our regional offices and even our headquarters, ICAO, you will see all of these and all the documentation and everything that has been done to help each member state and to help the authorities and to help the industry. So I would say there's a lot that has been learned, and we cannot afford to lose the opportunities that this negative COVID has given us.
And I think that's a beautiful word that you've just used. Despite everything, we have the opportunity. It's created opportunities for us to learn, and it's created opportunities for us to do better, to be more efficient in the future. Emmanuel, may I pass the same question to you?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sharron. So how can we maintain operational efficiency during this crisis? First of all, I'll start to talk from an airspace perspective in terms of bilateral agreements between countries. If you look at the aspect of on-time performance, and that is from operations and network perspective, we want to get there on time and we want to depart there on time. So basically, if some of the countries that have this, the bilateral agreement is not well emphasized, and you cannot fly over certain airspaces, so this is a longer routing and all the stuff. With this COVID pandemic, I think it's upon that time where the globe will come together to fight this negative virus, whereby such type of restriction can be given away, so that we have that direct flying into some of the countries. That's number one. And then another one is the asset efficiencies. You talked about the en route diversion airports, right? So it's upon the cargo and the airliners to kind of go back to the drawing book and look at the asset efficiencies in terms of aircraft performances. I'm talking about some of the aircraft that cannot fly for long hours based on the destinations. I know it's upon the planning and the financial aspect of an airline or a company on how they want to put their assets in the field. But in this particular aspect, whereby delivery of these materials, of this vaccine, is paramount, and it's something that we're geared to look at. So this is upon the airliners to look at the asset efficiencies and how we can get to those destinations on time without a lot of reroute or diversion. And in case of diversion, technical or anything of that aspect, and we cannot land in an airport because we cannot operate because they don't have that type of criteria to kind of accommodate the flight, not only from a technical perspective, but also from a COVID, they haven't met the criteria on that. So we're looking at that. And on the other side, just to make the operations keep going on, I believe some of the trainings can go virtual in terms of recurrency, so that we have some of the staff in the operations, have that recurrency to keep the operations going, rather than sending them to the to some of the training schools to come back for the recurrence of their license. Yeah. So I'm gonna look at that from an operations perspective. Yeah.
Thank you. I think we've seen teams now working virtually, and also due to the pandemic, having to look at different options for remote training, for virtual training. And sometimes we've probably seen efficiencies in this. So this is something that, we're going to potentially and most likely see more of this, because we can do things better than we did before, because we've learned through the pandemic. So finally, Flora, last but by no means least, from your perspective, from the ANSP, how do you see that we maintain our operational efficiencies as this crisis continues? Thank you.
Thank you. In addition to what Melvin and Emmanuel have said, I would say from an ANSP perspective, the issue of collaboration cannot be overemphasized. There's need for that to be taken seriously, right from the airport collaborative decision making to the collaborative decision making in the climb and descent phases, and eventually to what we are looking forward to as a region, air traffic flow management, and that will have to really come into play. So collaboration, that cannot be overemphasized, because you need a multi-sectoral approach in order to manage this particular pandemic. And going forward, even those entities that were a bit shy in, collaborating, I think now they have the courage, because they know if they don't collaborate, then they become the weak link in the system. And naturally, you don't want to be the one who is a weak link in any given system. Then the other thing that I would say that requires to be looked in terms of efficiency is training. We cannot take it for granted. Training and retraining, that will definitely have to take place so that we can become more and more efficient, and more so in terms of managing traffic. And when the vaccines are unleashed into the world, then of course you expect the number of movements to increase, and therefore we have to prepare now that we know that the vaccine is coming. And we, as ANSPs, we have no choice. We'll have to prepare to manage the traffic. Then the other thing is, of course, the public health contingencies, like Melvin mentioned, and again, health screening. This has to be efficient, because as we speak now, you hear of some of the passengers leaving one country, they are COVID negative with the certificate, but then when they land in another country, they are found to be positive. So now that screening and testing element also needs to be increased. The levels of efficiency need to increase so that at least we can slow down this particular pandemic. And the last but not least is the IT providers, because the whole world has gone IT. A good example is this particular conference. We would all be in Dubai right now, but courtesy of COVID, we are doing it at the comfort of our homes and offices and all that, utilizing the information technology. And therefore, that particular area needs to be very efficient because of the numerous virtual meetings, training, and everything else, including conferences now. So really, that's what I would say. Thank you.
Thank you, Flora. And you've ended on the technology note. And looking at what Melvin was speaking about, we've spoken about opportunities, standardization, training, moving into a virtual environment. Without the IT infrastructure that we're most fortunate to have now, we wouldn't have been able to come through and to deliver what we have. So, that's a very important point also. I think we've come to the end of our time slot here. I would like to thank all the panelists for participating in this discussion. I shall close now, but before I do we have a last word from each of you? Emmanuel, a last word?
Yeah, my last word is I'll go on with the integral communication between the CAA, the government, and the airliners. This is a high time we need to come together so that we make it work, because the vaccines God willing, they'll be here soon. And is that through that relationship that we can make everything efficient? Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Melvin?
I definitely agree with Emmanuel. And I think, innovation, taking advantage of innovation, and innovation can be a double-edged sword when it comes to, IT, because then there's all the cybersecurity issues that must be addressed. I think, we've seen very innovative ways to get around things. And as Flora said, this virtual world is here to stay, and that's something. But if I can say anything, is to understand this. The guidance we provide in all these directions and help and assistance and all this, it's not meaningful if it's not implemented. It's not meaningful if it's not coordinated in a manner that allows for standardization. And one state, one country cannot do it by itself, cannot succeed by itself. We must work together. We must work across all the states in the world to make sure that we have a good system in place to do what it needs to do in the aviation world. Thank you.
Thank you. And Flora, the final word to you.
Yeah, just like Emmanuel and Melvin have said, it boils down to collaboration. We all have to collaborate. All stakeholders have to collaborate so that we can get the aviation sector continuing, because at one time, it looked quite gloomy, but now there is hope and I just hope that those who may be laid off or something will be able to get their jobs back once we pull through. But this boils down to collaboration, 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 collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you, Flora, and thank you all for joining me on this discussion today. Thank you.